Back when there was no cell phone or internet, you had to rely on books, magazines, people, newspaper to find a connection that you were looking for. And sometimes it would take longer than instead of rolling on a phone and just finding instant gratification and answers. In my case, I was picking up martial arts books, magazines, you name it. Articles that had to do with Jeet Kune Do, books that had to do with Jeet Kune Do, but everything was funneling down to the main things that were necessary. What was really important to me was understanding the character of Bruce Lee. I found a couple of articles around 2000, 2001, and they were written by Doug Palmer. He was a student of Bruce Lee back in Seattle, and he was invited to go to Hong Kong and stay with his family. So he got to see a different light of Bruce Lee. More importantly, how did these things shape Doug's life? I sit down with him to talk about his life and his time with Bruce Lee. You don't practice anymore?
I don't, no. When I came back, after college and law school, I went to Japan and worked there for 4.5 years. And when I came back to Seattle, that was after Bruce died, I joined Taki's school. Taki was carrying on Bruce's school in Seattle here. And I took up boxing again too. Some of the students were boxers as well. But then I just realized I was getting older, and it was, I enjoyed the physical aspects, but it wasn't the same as when Bruce was around. So
right.
I kind of dropped out.
It stayed with you. I mean, at least the experience stayed with you.
Oh yeah.
All that
it's
stayed
a
with
vital part of my life and an important part of my life. And like I said, the lessons that I learned, I can apply them to all kinds of situations.
Doug was at a young age when he started boxing, and it followed him through his teenage years. He started getting into amateur fights, but he was very interested in what Bruce Lee was demonstrating.
I'd heard about karate. I don't know if I knew anybody who was taking it, but I knew what it was. Never heard of Kung Fu. So I was milling around the crowd, and I saw this demonstration of Kung Fu, and it was Bruce, and he had 2 students with him. They proceeded to give this demonstration, and like I said, I'd never heard of Kung Fu before, but I was just mesmerized by what I saw. He demonstrated a form, the praying mantis form, which was something I'd never seen before. And I mean, I realized from his explanation that there were different Kung Fu schools, and the praying mantis school, was a lot of the moves were patterned after the moves of a praying mantis, et cetera. And I was just, just mind-boggling. And he was extremely graceful in the way he presented it. And then he demonstrated Chi Sao, the sticking hand, with Jesse and Taki.
We're talking about the 1960s. Nobody's ever seen Chi Sao before, let alone constant flow of energy. Anything remotely close would be jiu-jitsu, just like the roll on the ground. But here, Bruce Lee was putting an incredible display of movement, structure, pressure, dissolving. He was doing something uniquely different.
It had the hands, like boxing, but it also had feet and everything else. And I just thought it was a more complete system, so I decided I wanted to learn it.
Do you feel like you wanted to build more confidence in that type of form?
I guess it was heavily not so much to fight, but more to build confidence, so I didn't have to fight.
Okay.
And over the years, it's actually helped me avoid fights more than use them in fights. So.
Yeah. An important component to martial arts is to build that self-control and discipline. And then you learn to share it with others to ensure that their life is shaped and balanced the way you would like to see it. Finding balance in your life is something that I always explain, but a lot of people don't know how.
I mean, balance, I think, is important. And a lot of the life lessons that I learned from just watching Bruce have helped me navigate that. One part of the class was devoted to him just talking, and he might talk about the different Kung Fu schools, or he often talked about the spiritual aspect and how to meditate and what it meant to be fluid and what it meant to be like water.
Doug got into an altercation in college, and this put him to the test. What I wanted to find out is what prevented him from going further. What made you dissolve from that completely?
I was obviously angry. I reached down and grabbed his scrotum and squeezed because he was on top of me, blazing away with his fist.
Right.
He came back out, faced me, and I hit him. I kicked him in the groin and hit him with a left hook. One of his roommates said, "Oh, use your fists." I was thinking to myself, "Well, screw that," and I thought that was kind of absurd under the circumstances. But it paused me. Part of me wished I had finished it. I know Bruce would have. Bruce would have made sure the guy was on the ground.
Almost seems like there's a part of you that you cared about something, and that allowed you to stop.
Bruce himself, actually, in his later years, used the minimum amount of force necessary to resolve a situation. Sometimes it didn't take any force at all. That was, I guess, one of the lessons that I took from just watching how he operated. Meeting a friend at someplace. I was walking along First Avenue, and as I was walking along, I saw somebody chase somebody else, hitting him and kicking him across the street. And I stepped up and said, knock it off. Looked at me and he said, "This isn't your business, butt out." I stood in a posture that Bruce had taught us, that kind of like this. And something about just the way I stood, and I didn't back away from the guy, gave him pause, and he looked at me and he said, "It's a good thing you're wearing glasses."
It's 1963 and Bruce Lee is back at home with his family. He invites Doug to spend time with him for a summer in Hong Kong to experience the culture, his relationship with his family, his friends. He even had a chance to attend a wedding.
So I arrived in June. He'd already been there for several months. And his family went out of their way to they were gracious and welcomed me as part of the family, basically. Mm-hmm. And we had meals together. Hong Kong then was, it still is, very hot and muggy in the summer. There's no air conditioning in the apartment. So everybody was very, minimum clothing and, very informal.
Yip Man is known to be the teacher of Bruce Lee, but he's also responsible for perpetuating the art form of Wing Chun. Doug got to experience Bruce Lee and Yip Man training together.
He started doing that, I assume, in March when he first got there. And by the time I got there in June, he'd been seeing Yip Man, and he invited me to come along a couple of times to watch them work out. That was in Yip Man's apartment. His apartment had a room that was kind of like a training room or workout room where they would practice Chi Sao. And I just, sat and watched. It was just the three of us.
There's a book called Chinese Kung Fu by Bruce Lee, and in there shows photographs of Bruce Lee modifying the Wing Chun stance. In fact, in this position, it allows him to be almost in a cat stance position so he can strike at will. So this is a little variation, and it already shows how he was evolving his instruction. It seems like he was making it work differently. And what did you get out of that learning Wing Chun in that way? Because there's different methods that I've encountered over the years.
I found out later that he was already modifying Wing Chun somewhat. His stance was more sideways than traditional Wing Chun. Mm-hmm. Chi Sao got de-emphasized over the years. I think he found that it didn't work for everybody.
It just seems like it is also a very important component to what you're learning. I mean, even if you don't want to use it later, at least you are aware. Maybe it de-emphasized, do you think, on a level of comprehension? Maybe because it's difficult to understand for a lot of people?
I mean, we did practice Chi Sao. I mean, that was part of every class. We would do it, but I think, like I said, over the years, it was less and less done. Why? The quote I loved of his when he was, after he moved down to LA, And he wrote a letter to Taki saying, Chisao I'm beyond that now. And he said, have you ever tried to do Chisao with somebody looking at his belly button? And that's when he was, right. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was taking lessons from him. And, right. If you've seen pictures, I'm sure you have, of the two, it's like David and Goliath. And he had been learning that even since, from before when he first got here. A lot of the guys that he met that were students were martial artists in their own right and bigger than he was. I mean, Jesse Glover, Taki was even bigger compared to the people, his opponents and peers in right. Hong Kong. And so he had to develop techniques for dealing with that. And by the time he got to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I mean, it was obvious that, the Chisao didn't work the same way. And so, I guess that's closing the gap became more important. You stay out of range and then you close the gap as quick as you can.
Yeah. After the experience in Hong Kong, Doug and Bruce Lee traveled back home, but before they made their final destination of Seattle, they had 2 stops to make. One to meet up with Ed Parker, who was an American Kempo karate specialist, and was also the conductor of the International Karate Championships. This laid the platform for Bruce Lee to show his Kung Fu and later Jeet Kune Do. When they finished with Ed Parker, they met up with James Lee, who was a personal friend of Bruce Lee. It also had a similar vision to self-defense, was a martial artist in his own right, built equipment for Bruce Lee.
Bruce and James were obviously kindred spirits. I mean, James, they're both very much into what was practical. They're very much into not caring about tradition and, Christian says you don't teach non-Chinese or et cetera.
Right.
They were into the practicality of whether particular moves, whether they worked or not, didn't matter whether it came from the school you were originally with or
right.
whether it was a different school. So.
Years have gone by and Doug is in Hong Kong for business. He decides to look up Bruce Lee and his family, but ends up finding something that he never imagined. 1972, you're in Hong Kong and you were inquiring about Bruce Lee's family.
I had kind of lost touch with Bruce. I mean, the last I'd heard, he was in LA trying to get into the movie business. The Green Hornet series was over and he was, trying to get into the movies. So I thought, first time I'd been back to Hong Kong, I wanted to look up his family. And I went to the apartment that he lived in on Nathan Road that I'd spent a couple months in. They didn't know who the Lee family was. It was a child care daycare center. Looked up in the phone book and tried to call. There was actually a fellow named Bruce Lee in the phone book that he must be getting a lot of calls. He said, no, I'm not that Bruce Lee. And it was sitting in the office of an accountant, a Chinese accountant that I was doing business with. And I happened to mention that I was looking for an old friend. I said, I said, you wouldn't know who he is. He's a friend named Bruce Lee. You probably would know who he is, but you might know his father, Lei Hui-chun, who was a well-known Cantonese movie star. And Bruce is still in LA, but I'm trying to find his family here. So this guy looked at me really strangely. He says, you're an old friend of his, Bruce's? I said, yeah. Did you say you're an old friend and you think he's in Los Angeles? You don't know he's here in Hong Kong? I said, what do you mean? He reaches over and he pulls up a newspaper off the coffee table and opens it to the movie section. And here's a full-page ad or something. And he said, he's here in Hong Kong. And I had a friend call the movie studio and leave a message. And Bruce called back. And he hadn't yet struck a deal to film Enter the Dragon. That was coming down the pike, I guess, right after that.
Before they were married, Linda and Bruce Lee were dating under some challenging circumstances, and Doug faced a similar situation, so they both planned something. You guys had to change because of certain
Bruce
obstacles.
He and Linda were dating then, but her parents didn't appreciate her going out with non-whites, so she would sneak out. And I was home for Christmas vacation from college, and I asked a Chinese girl out for a date, and her parents didn't like her going out with non-Chinese. So Bruce and I we double dated, and I picked Linda up, and her parents were very happy to, nice, presentable guy, going to Yale and, you know, et cetera. And Bruce picked my date up, and then we switched in the car. And it worked out. You would never do that, though.
No, that's why I looked at her. It's not every day that you get to meet with a famous boxer, but Doug Palmer got to meet Muhammad Ali under some circumstances that needed his legal advice.
First was in Tokyo when he was there to fight Mac Foster.
Right.
That was one of his first fights after he was, you know, he was basically took a leave of absence of 3 or 4 years because of his stance against the Vietnam War. And this was his comeback. I was working as a lawyer in Tokyo, and one of our clients was a fellow named Rocky Aoki who had a chain of restaurants in the States. I got to meet Ali in the course of these dealings. And then the second time was years later. A Chinese company that had gotten scammed came to us, and you know, they weren't sure what had happened, but they'd paid out $2.25 million. I got involved in the business side to negotiate, and they hired Ali to come over and chartered a jumbo jet and all the boxers and their entourage and et cetera, including Muhammad Ali and the lawyers that were involved, me and the other guy in the office. We went along and spent a few days in Beijing at this event.
I always appreciate people spending the time to share their life experience. You get to look at it from a different angle. And in this case, I asked Doug what he could share to this audience and new generation. What kind of advice can you give someone that's coming up into a career that can hold on to something and just focus? I don't know, what kind of bit of advice would you give others that need focus in some capacity, some way?
I don't know that I have any particular wisdom to offer, but you know, it's the same things that a lot of people say. I mean, find something you enjoy doing and work hard at it. And, I mean, that's one thing people think, well, Bruce had natural gifts and talents, but he worked his butt off and whatever he set his mind to, and kept at it until he mastered it. If it was something he wanted to do, and there's no substitute for spending the time and practicing toward whatever you want to do. And it really doesn't matter what it is. Not everybody is going to be a musician or an artist or an athlete or, you know, whatever. I mean, so everybody's path is going to be different. Just work hard at it.
What we can learn from Doug's story is when you're searching for a need, a mentor will appear, and sometimes unexpectedly. In Doug's case, it's been decades since he's learned from him, but those principles applied and shaped his life. Bruce Lee was a part of Doug's life, but Doug had his own unique circumstances. To share Bruce Lee's expression, absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, and add what is specifically your own: character, determination, focus, drive. Doug's life journey was beautifully expressed on his own. To learn more about Doug and his time with Bruce Lee, you can pick up a copy of his book called Bruce Lee, Sifu, Friend, and Big Brother. Till next time.